Hey folks, Joe Howard here. All right, this week a few updates before the show. WPMRR community update. Maciek from last week's episode. He's doing an AMA in the WPMRR community. So if you have any follow-up questions around building a newsletter, following news in the WordPress space or WordPress community, feel free to go in there and shoot him a comment on that thread. He'll be happy to get you a reply. He's really active in there, so he should get you one pretty quickly too. Cool. Summit news. WPMRR Virtual Summit is coming up in September 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. Let me pull up some of the new sponsors that we have that we're able to announce this week. Some have already announced as legacy sponsors: GoDaddy Pro, Blog Vault, Green Geeks, WP Engine, and Weglot. I have two new legacy sponsors to announce this week. One is Cloudways and one is WordPress.com. So welcome to our two new legacy sponsors this week. Also two new growth sponsors. Ones I've already announced: Kinsta, Molly, Elementor, and Paid Memberships Pro. New growth sponsors to welcome this week are SiteGround and Jetpack. So welcome to our also two new growth sponsors for the WPMRR Summit coming up. For community and summit, just go to community.wpmrr.com. And if you're not already a member there, just create a quick membership for you. Just takes about 1 minute. Get logged in and you'll automatically be registered for this year's summit, which we will be live streaming right in the community. Cool. All right, this week's episode of the WPMRR podcast, we are doing a rerun this week of an episode that Christie and I recorded in 2019, October 2019, before COVID hit, before we had this pandemic on our hands. It is episode 64, Digital Nomading When You're an Essential Employee. Who knows if we'll be going back to the office? Some people are, but I think a lot of folks in the WordPress space, for years have been working remotely, have been working in a distributed manner, and will continue to do so. So if you are an employee of a company or a member of a remote team, this is a great episode to with some tips, tricks, strategies, tactics, all that stuff, just how to be a better employee while also being able to do some traveling, work from wherever you want to. I think it's also a good episode for employers or people who are running teams, people who are leaders of companies, to know what may bring some of your team members joy and to help them be a better employee while better managing them. This is also a nice opportunity to welcome Christie back to the podcast. So without further ado, I guess welcome Christie Chirinos back to the podcast. Christie, who used to host the podcast and now gets to be back on the show. All right, enjoy today's episode.
Aloha, WordPress people. Welcome back to WPMRR WordPress podcast. I'm Christy.
And I'm Joe.
And you're listening to the WordPress Business Podcast. What's going on in your life this week, Joe?
Man, that was an excellent intro. You even caught me off guard there a little bit. I didn't even know you were going with the aloha. So that was very special.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. It just slipped out. I was like, okay, we're going with this.
All right, perfect. Cool. Not too much new with me. I've been, this week has been a lot of marketing and sales stuff. I've been really focusing on what that looks like at WP Buffs and revamping that a little bit and finding some good little I don't know if I'd call them hacks, but they're improvements in how we do things. So up until 2 weeks ago on our blog, we were trying to collect email addresses a little bit more. And I've kind of stopped doing that. And I've said, well, let's just see if people need help directly and want to book a call. So now we have a little book a call thing, little scroll box in the corner that comes up, not too intrusive. And it's booking a ton of calls just out of nowhere, and it's great. So I think we increased our calls by 30% in September over the last month. So so that's an interesting move forward, and so I'm happy about that.
Whoa, hold on. Let's pause on that for a second. That's super interesting. So you swapped out the email collection for a call, and people are booking calls. That's wild because I would imagine that somebody who books a call is, much closer to the purchase part of the sales funnel than somebody who gives you your email. We think of email collection as this commitment that's still low commitment so that we can nurture that lead over several weeks or months. Whereas somebody who's like, I need 30 minutes of your time now, and I'm going to sink in 30 minutes of my time, and we're going to talk about my problems, it's probably pretty ready to buy.
Yeah, it's so my thought process before was kind of people need to trust us before they hand over the keys to their website. So let's put them in our email list. Let's nurture them with some content and some free stuff. And then eventually we'll hop on a call with them. And I was like, well, it's probably worth an experiment to see like, hey, let's just try and book a call straight from all the organic traffic we drive. And experimentation is working so far. So I'm looking at our dashboard right now, and the book a call little scroll box thing, it just has a link to our call booking. It's converting at 3%, which is pretty good.
Wow.
It's 2,763 impressions and 72 conversions. That doesn't mean 72 people booked a call. It means 72 people clicked in the little scroll box to go book a call. And I'm sure some of those people dropped off along the way. Not everyone booked a call, but every day I see like 4, 5, 6 calls get scheduled for the next day. Like today, I had a really chill day. Like I had nothing in my calendar yesterday, and I was like, oh, it'll be an easy day today. And then like 4 calls got booked today. So I have like a bunch of sales calls today, which is good. So yeah, I think it's working pretty well so far. So I'm pretty pumped about it.
Yo, stay tuned for Men of WooCommerce at Liquid Web. Schedule a call today. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery, or so they say. So.
I'm sure I stole it from someone else. So please, and everyone listening, take it from me, or at least experiment with it. Yeah, you never know it'll work. So what's new in your world, Miss Aloha?
So this is week 2, working from Hawaii. It's been pretty fun. I got here about a week and a half ago. I traveled on Sunday because I wanted the jet lag advantage, which we'll talk about more later as during this episode. So once I got here, it was like straight to bed and then start work. So my first 5 days were like work and then whatever I could get in the evenings. And then on the weekends, I was like full throttle Hawaii, right? And I like did all this stuff. I had a blast. Like went to the farmer's market. I made all these friends. I like went out to Waikiki. They invited me to karaoke. We did this, we did that. The following day, I like drove to the side of the island and we like rode kayaks with my new friends and had a barbecue on the beach. It was just like peak Hawaii. And then on Monday, I woke up with a crazy cold.
That happens. You have too much fun. Sorry. One day we come, oh no.
My body was like, excuse me, ma'am, this is way more than we usually do. No.
Usually it's a quick little yoga session and a day of work and some relaxation. No, this was full throttle travel.
And it was just like funny. And on Monday, it was just like a tickle in the throat. And I was like, no, I was in denial. Maybe it's just a fan. I'm just dried out, and I still made plans to do things. And then on Tuesday morning, I woke up like, it is not just a fan. Oh, man. So it's kind of a bummer, but honestly, I had so much fun on the weekend that when it happened, I was like, okay, makes sense. And it's honestly been a blast. I think that, and we'll talk about this more as well, when you take your remote work and you just plant it somewhere else, you kind of have to remind yourself that you're just putting your regular life in a different place. And that's what this has felt like to me. I mean, it is beautiful, even just sitting here where I'm staying with like the windows all open and the beautiful sunrise every single day is such a luxury. Drinking my Kona coffee, eating star fruit that's locally grown. And it's just been a blast. It's my first time in Hawaii and totally lives up to the hype.
Amazing. I have been to Hawaii once. It was on the Big Island. It was senior year. It was a few friends. We all went to Hawaii. One of my friends had her parents had a timeshare there. So I was like, let's just buy some flights to Hawaii and go. And it was awesome. It was during the time when we were really supposed to be writing our senior theses. So it was very much like fuck it, we're going to Hawaii and we'll write it when we get back. And I definitely had a lot of writing and stuff to do when we got back, but it was a total blast. And so yeah, I'm excited to hear more about your travels there and like work life balance while traveling there during this episode. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. That's hilarious though. Yeah, I'm on Oahu, so I heard the Big Island is really something stunning, and that's where you can really see all the volcanoes and things like that. But I have to come back.
Yes, there's always time. Cool. Maybe you want to introduce this week's episode, since it's kind of like, we'll both be able to jam on this topic, but you're living it right now. So maybe you can do a little intro for us.
Are we doing transparency around new reviews?
Yes, we are. Transparency around new reviews. Let's take a step back. Christie is the smart one in this dynamic duo of making sure that we stay on task. New iTunes reviews. Now I just have to, casually take up some time while I open this. 23 iTunes reviews. Looks like that's the same since last time we checked, which was a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago. When last time I recorded. 23 reviews. If you're a listener and you're a longtime listener especially, and you've learned like one thing from this podcast, give us a little iTunes review and tell us what you learned in the comments with your favorite emoji there as well. Downloads. I don't have downloads open right now, but I did check this morning, and I think we just passed like 17,000 total downloads. According to this, I've been actually doing a little research around download numbers. I don't think this includes our iTunes downloads, which is interesting because iTunes is for most people the biggest number of listeners. For a lot of people, it's like 80 to 90% of their listeners. So I don't know. We always say like whatever the analytics. It's just we like to say it so people can like know what's going on with us, and so we can be transparent. But yeah. I have some more research to do, so maybe I'll do some more research there before next episode to say like 17,000 downloads. Is that like 17,000 non-iTunes downloads? I don't know. But yeah, 250 to 300 downloads an episode or so from maybe non-Apple. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, that's where we are for all that stuff.
Cool. We're doing great. One last bit of announcement that I'm going to get in there before we get into today's topic is if you're coming to WordCamp US, we are going to be at WordCamp US. And on Saturday morning, we are going to get together with our friends from the Get Options podcast and have some coffee at the Starbucks across the street from the venue in the lobby of the conference hotel, which is the Grand Hyatt.
Sounds right.
And join us. If you've been a listener of the podcast, we'd love to meet you. It would be really cool to finally know that we're not just screaming into the void and that you are listening and absorbing. So yeah, come hang out, come get some free coffee, come get some Starbucks brew to power you through Saturday of WordCamp US, which is going to be the long one with the party and everything. So
woo,
join us. Woo. Okay. Let's talk about today's topic. So today's topic is going to be all about working away from home. I feel like this is a trend that's gotten really big in the last couple of years, right? Like everybody's like, work remotely, travel while you work, digital nomad. That got big in like the last 5 years or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know a lot of people, when I just go around talking about my job, they're like, oh, I want to do that. And then like, travel while I work from my laptop. And I'm currently doing it right now. I went through a period as a founder where I did it pretty consistently for several months. And it was fun. I enjoy it. It's definitely a huge privilege, but it's also an art form. Especially if it's important to be productive, right? I think that, especially as a founder, that's not to say that it's less important to be productive. I think it's maybe even possibly more important to stay productive, but you have more flexibility in how you call your own productivity. Whereas as an employee, you got to make sure that you're plugging into all the other puzzle pieces. And as an employee of a 700-person company that is primarily in the Eastern time zone and in the Central time zone, it was particularly important for me to make sure that my flexibility was not an inconvenience for other people. And something that really mattered to me was to make sure that I made a good example of how productive and reliable a colleague can be while working from not their usual time zone, so that that privilege, can continue to exist, be extended to others, so on and so forth. So that's what we're talking about today. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm really excited for this episode. I think Yeah, like you mentioned, remote work has obviously blown up over the last 10, especially the last 5 years. So you can go to a lot of places and hear a lot of episodes about remote work and how to work remotely. And we'll talk about a little bit about that today. But we talked a little bit offline before this about how we do want to kind of, there's so much content out there about how to, like, if you're a founder or if you're like, your own entrepreneur or freelancer, how to do remote work. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but we also definitely want to focus on you, Christie, since you're actively doing this right now. You're in Hawaii in a way different time zone than pretty much everybody on your team. I assume there's no one else in Hawaii, so I assume you're kind of off on your own, literally on an island. And so how do you work remotely, not just as your own entrepreneur or freelancer, but as part of a larger team, as an employee of a company? How do you continue to be effective, like you said, and make sure your communication remains solid, all your projects stay in line when you're how many hours back than you usually are? Are you like 6 hours earlier? And that's a challenge for sure. And I think that'll be a nice, unique perspective for this episode.
Yeah, so this is something that's interesting. Out of curiosity, I looked it up, and I am in the Hawaiian Aleutian time zone.
Aleutian?
Which, yes. That alludes to the Aleutian Peninsula, and I might be butchering that word, and if anybody from Alaska is listening, sorry. It alludes to the Aleutian Peninsula in Alaska. So not only am I not in a time zone with anybody else from Liquid Web, I am also not on a time zone for most everybody else in the world.
Yeah, you're like, there's a lot of Pacific Ocean to your east and a lot of Pacific Ocean to your west, and you're just smack dab there in the middle.
I've thought about that a lot while I'm here. I'm like, I'm literally in a deserted island in the Pacific.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other people here, but like...
Liquid Web deserted.
Liquid Web deserted. And I'll go over a little bit how I ended up here, right? Like I didn't just like pack out my bags and decide to go to Hawaii. The story there is that my best friend from childhood, from when I was growing up in Florida, like 11 or 10, her mom, this was like her life goal. We grew up our entire lives hearing her talk about how after the girls left for college, she was moving to Hawaii. She had like all the aloha stuff over her house, really cool. And guess what? She freaking did it. The last girl left for college and she was like, sell my house, transfer my job, move my stuff, Hawaii. So she moved to Hawaii, and ever since then, I mean, it's been a while now, offering me to come by and stay. And it just hasn't happened yet. And the opportunity came up that she was actually going to be gone for a couple of weeks. She was back to the mainland, as they say. Mm-hmm. And she was like, if you want to just come by, I know you have a remote job. You can use my car. You can stay in my house and just be in Hawaii for a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, how could I possibly say no to this, right?
Totally.
Looked at my calendar, it all worked out. And that's how I ended up coming to Hawaii. So kind of like a cool stay, right? Like I've gotten a house to myself and just like to sort of spread out and be comfortable. And that's, I think, something that's really important for productivity on the road as an employee, but just in general, even for founders, people who think about doing remote work. I know that there are some employees, I've heard of folks over at Codable who are like vanning it while working. And I think some people can do that. I personally found that I could not. If I wanted to be productive while working from somewhere that isn't home, I had to have a sort of like remote home base with a workstation. That was the big thing. I needed a workstation, right? And it's actually really interesting. On Airbnb, not that I had to do this for Hawaii, you can actually put on a filter for workstation.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Yep, you can. And I mean, what that assures is that you'll get like a desk and a chair. But
I was going to say, like, what does that mean?
It assures a desk and a chair. But a desk and a chair makes a big difference. Yeah. Having a place where you can set up shop for whatever length period of time you're going to be there working is a huge part to my productivity. And having that here in Hawaii really mattered. I set up shop on what is a clear sort of eating area, dining room table. And I just spread out all my technology and chargers and microphones and everything on here, which I hauled all in my backpack across all the states.
The Blue Yeti just taking up space in the backpack.
I swear, when I took the Blue Yeti through security, they were looking at me like, what the fuck?
I always forget to take my microphones out too. And if they see it when they're looking through my bag, they're like, who are you? Who are you? Don't, let's not do this right now.
And it's probably not the weirdest thing they saw that day, but it's probably up there, right?
Yeah.
And so I ended up here, and I've done this before as a founder. I worked from many places. In the beginning of 2018, I worked from Japan, which is a 13-hour difference. I worked from Serbia. I didn't work from Israel, but similar time zone. Worked from the UK for a little bit. And this was all for WordCamp travel too, which is kind of interesting. But it was different because I got to call the shots more as the co-founder and CEO. And with this, like I said, it was a little bit more important for me to make sure that this privilege, quite honestly, is what I want to call it, was maintained by me continuing to be a great teammate while I was doing this. Mm-hmm. And that was different, and it took some interesting notes. So first things first, I'm like a sleep nerd. This is just a thing.
Sleep nerd.
Like,
I think this is new.
I'm a sleep nerd. I'm obsessed with sleep. It's literally in my calendar. I'm just going to let that sink in for a moment.
So where
sleep
in your
is
calendar?
in my calendar.
What time?
It's a recurring daily event from midnight to 8. It's in my calendar.
That's so good. I've actually never heard that. Just a time boxing, serious time boxer.
Serious time boxing. But the thing is, I've been doing that before I ever time boxed. I think I picked it up from a trainer. There was a woman back in like my aerial work days that started talking about how she puts sleep in her calendar because sleep is so important for physical recovery. That having it in there just sort of reminds her that she doesn't have these like unlimited swaths of time. And even then, time management wasn't as important for me, but it was one of the things where like, well, Jill's doing it, so I'm going to do it. And I just sort of kept it up. I remember this one time I told Josh about it and he was like, that's really dorky. And he's not wrong. But so I'm a sleep freak. And then the other thing about the reason that it's in my calendar is because I've sort of geeked out on figuring out my optimal sleep. They say that we all have a natural sleep pattern that we would find if we weren't woken up by alarms or demands or things like that, where we just kind of like fall asleep at the same time and wake up at the same time. And when my work transitioned to mostly remote project-based work, I just got really into figuring out what that was. I was like pretty obsessed with the promises of that, this idea of like, don't wake up with an alarm, right? And I found that my natural sleep pattern is kind of like I go to sleep sometime between midnight and 1, and I wake up somewhere between 8 and 9, at least on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And once I figured that out and started getting used to that, I trained myself, perhaps unfortunately, to just sleep for 8 hours. So now I'm at this point where I get about 7.5 hours of sleep, and that is the sleep I will get. If I go to bed at 10, I will naturally wake up at like 6:55 sharp. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened last night. I just got into this place where I learned a lot about my sleep needs and got comfortable with my sleep pattern. So that sounds really good until you pluck yourself out of your regular time zone.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next. Is like, it sounds good when you have consistency in your time zone and at the same time, time zone all the time. So what happened when you traveled to Hawaii in terms of sleep?
When I traveled to Hawaii, I knew that the one thing that was going to happen was that I was going to be jet lagged when I got here. And that no matter what, I was going to zonk out for 7.5 to 8 hours. Right? So that's when I thought about taking advantage of the jet lag. That's why I flew on Sunday. I knew that if I flew on Sunday, then I would get to Hawaii, go to sleep for exactly 8 hours, and then wake up early and sort of maintain my schedule. And since I've, again, sort of figured out this way in which my natural sleep pattern puts me to bed around midnight and wakes me up around 8, 9, I knew that once I adjusted to the time zone, right, the different light patterns here, that would creep up throughout the 2 weeks. So what I'm getting at here is that knowing myself was super important here, and knowing what to expect out of my own body's need for sleep was probably about 50% of my success, right? Because everything else I'm going to talk about, it's about like timing and communication and things like that. But even just understanding what was going to happen and knowing how to work with it so that I wouldn't be cranky or unproductive, things like that, was, in my opinion, half the battle. So I think geek out about your sleep, we tend to underestimate how important sleep is to our top functioning. And when you're doing something challenging, like managing these communication and work stuff and all the other aspects, having that part of you top notch, I think really matters. So I knew what to expect and I planned around it, and it went exactly like that. So I went to bed at like 6:30 when I got here, and it's just wild. It's wild how when you put work into getting to know that part of yourself, it's incredible to watch your body do exactly what you think it's going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like went to bed at 6:30, woke up at 4:30 or 3:30 or whatever. And yeah, I just, logged on and started working at 4 or 5 a.m. And this is the next part where communication becomes super important. So as in all remote work, honestly, communication and over communication is key. So what did that mean for me was making sure that everybody knew what was going on. When I logged on that Monday morning, perfectly jet lagged, just like I planned it, I wrote in Slack and I was like, hey, everybody, a reminder that until this date, I am going to be working out of Hawaii. Here is what to expect out of my hours. The jet lag is helping me right now, but as it goes on, it won't. That time difference is 6 hours.
Yeah.
Just this is what's going on.
I think that piece is really important too. Like we even go back to before you even traveled, and you're like setting expectations already about what your time zone is going to be like, when you're going to be online, when you're not going to be online, not just like going to Hawaii and slacking. Like, hey, everyone, guess what? I'm in Hawaii.
Surprise!
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we should totally mention that. Yes. Before I ever got on the plane, many weeks before I even got on the plane, I asked my boss, the ubiquitous Chris Lemma, and if it was okay, and he said, yeah, totally. He's on the West Coast, so it's only a 3-hour difference from him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I asked some of my key teammates that I work every single day whether this would be okay with them. I don't want to inconvenience them, and just let them know. And of course, all of them were really sweet and encouraging people who were like, you can't possibly pass this up. It's Hawaii. So that was really cool. But yes, so over communication is key. So communicating before, communicating the day off with expectations, and then just using the tools that are available to you, right? Like, for example, I updated my Slack status to say what's going on. So if somebody didn't get the message or whatever, they can like hover and see.
The most important piece of that, though, is do you remember what emoji you chose for my status being Hawaii?
The hibiscus, obviously.
obviously. Okay. You got that one. Good. I was worried.
The hibiscus.
Is that hibiscus? Is that what it's called?
Or I don't know if that's like the official name of it. You know what I mean? Like the pink flower.
Yeah.
You'll have to put that emoji on the title of this episode. Yeah, but so use that. Use the Slack status.
It is hibiscus. It's hibiscus.
Is it hibiscus or hibiscus?
hibiscus. Hibiscus. Ooh, I'm a spelling bee champ.
Bam. Yeah, so other tools at your disposal. I set some out of office hours for what would regularly be hours that I would be in the office. Again, it's tiered given what I was expecting of my jet lag and my sleep patterns, because I'm a sleep nerd.
And again, the setting of like time zone is also a Slack thing, right?
Yes, we're going to get into how Slack
Okay, I'm getting ahead of
Help
myself.
me.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. But in Google Calendar is what I'm talking about, where the office hours,
right.
you can set out of office hours that automatically decline meeting invitations. So I set those up in the early morning so that nobody would schedule like a 4 a.m. call with me outside of the ones that I already had pre-committed.
Yeah.
And that sort of helped. And in the message, I was like, I'm declining this message because I'm currently in a time zone that would make this time difficult. Please choose a later time.
Cool.
I
So
wrote that in the message.
That message. Whoa, I didn't know that. So cool.
And it helped because there was a sort of emergency meeting that had to get scheduled while I was here sometime later last week. And they got the message and they were like, oh, shoot, this is the only time that somebody can do this. And then I was like, oh, okay, like send me the invitation again and I'll get up early. So that happened. And then, before we started recording, we caught up on something that I found really interesting, which was the way that Slack helped me out. So when I opened up my computer, a lot of your work apps will say, hey, we noticed you're in a different time zone, right? Because your computer will pick up that you're in a different time zone. And do you want to switch into this? And I'm like, yeah. And then with Slack, I had to change the time zone that I was in the settings. And then that adjusted my do not disturb hours to be the right thing. And then in addition to that, it did this really cool thing where it reminded people at the bottom of the time zone that I was in. So, if somebody was writing me a Slack message at 4 a.m, which is a reasonable time over in the East Coast, like 10 a.m., it would just sort of give them a little notification on the bottom that said like, hey, it's 6:15 a.m. for Christie right now. And
I messaged you about like recording today. Do you want to record today? And I saw this. I can't see it right now in Slack, but when I messaged you, it said like, hey, this person's outside of business hours, or it said like, it is 2:30 in the morning right now or something for this person. I was like, oh, right. She's in Hawaii. So.
Yep, exactly. So that was helpful because if you didn't see my message in my team group or the status or whatnot, you would get the little time notification. So over communication and using all the tools available at your disposal to be a good teammate and let people know what to expect was huge. And did that. And then other than that, it was honestly mostly good. I definitely had to pull some early mornings. We have a standing 10 a.m. call that I just, got up at 4 a.m. to take on Tuesday. Both Tuesdays. It just so happened that the second Tuesday, I was also dying sick, like red in the face. And so I called out, but from illness, not time zone. And
kind of the same thing, maybe. I'm jet lagged. I'm so sick.
And then again, that sort of emergency meeting as well, got up early for that. So it does take some work on your part, right? You're the one who is jetting off to some Pacific Ocean island paradise. So you better put in the work to retain that privilege.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point that like I feel like a lot of people want to travel these exotic places or whatever and just have fun the whole time they're in their trip, which you can do, right? You can have fun on these trips. You absolutely can. Just remember that you're lucky enough to be on this trip and it's not the end of the world if you have to put in a little extra work or not even just extra work, just like inconvenient work or be a little bit inconvenienced by time zone other people are in. That is the price that you're paying to take that trip. And I think it's important for everybody to remember that when they're trying to work and travel. Yeah, good point.
I think that's very important, especially when you work in a team, right? Like the dynamics are very different depending on the company and the size of your team and the expectations of your team. My work tends to be a little bit more asynchronous than most, right? But at the same time, it's not completely asynchronous. And keeping in mind that mindset that this is a privilege and that I need to put in the work to maintain this privilege and also extend it to others, it's an important mindset to say like, hey, go to bed early and get up at 5 a.m. It's not a big deal, right? But yeah.
One thing I want to mention that you just said that I would love to even talk just a little bit more about was the synchronous versus asynchronous modes of work. So your position is somewhat I always mix these up, but I believe asynchronous, which means you don't necessarily have to be like working one-on-one or be on the same time zone as someone to get work done. Like you can get 3 hours of work done here and pass off to someone else, and then they can get a few hours of work done. And that's obviously going to affect like this kind of trip where you're changing time zone 6 hours. If you have to be online with someone else, you may have to like work through the middle of the night or work odd hours. But with your kind of position, this kind of trip I think is a little bit easier based on just because you're doing work while everyone else is doing work. It's not insanely different than you doing work, 6 hours ahead of everyone, because you can do all that work and then shoot it into Slack. And when people wake up, they have all that work in Slack and they can continue work. But also another reason why it's so important to be such a good communicator or just a remote person in general, because if you pass someone off and they have like 10 questions, like that's not helpful for anybody. They have to wait a whole nother day to get it done. And so, I think that's a good point, but definitely an interesting thing that I hadn't exactly thought of. That was probably pretty helpful for you being able to work on this trip.
That's exactly right. My position is asynchronous, which is, project-based as opposed to synchronous. I don't know. And
Synchronous.
With that said, though, right, it's not a completely asynchronous position. The reason that we tend to say that something like a founder or whatnot or a freelancer has an easier time with this than even I did during this trip is because their work is even more asynchronous. My work still requires customer interaction and team collaboration, and I have to make sure that I'm there and available for the people that need me at the times they need me. So some overlap was pretty important. And then timely responses to customers was really important. So if a customer got looped in, if it's early in the morning, they're a priority, making sure that I checked my emails with priority and mindset as opposed to just first in, first out, just what I usually do, were probably pretty important skills. But yes, were my position a completely time-based position, this would have been a completely different ballgame. And there's also the consideration of other people, right? So again, I'm a sleep nerd and I knew what was going to happen. I think that helps a lot in being adjusted to this type of situation. So as my jet lag faded away and my wake up times became closer and closer and closer to my regular 8 a.m., I would work later into the day, right? When I first woke up and I was super jet lagged, I worked until I started work at 4 a.m. and I stopped working at like 1, and that lasted until like Thursday or Friday as I got more used to the light cycle here. And so on Friday, if I'm working at 5 p.m. like I normally might, I better be really mindful that if I send a Slack message, that's 11 p.m. on a Friday for one of my teammates.
Right.
And making sure that I'm not sending that message if the person isn't on Do Not Disturb, or scheduling the email if that's a better choice, so that I'm not disrupting their life in the same way that you would think about that at home, right? Like if you were, for whatever reason, don't do this, just stop doing this. If you do this, stop doing this. If you were working at Friday at 11 p.m., you wouldn't just send Slack messages without thinking about it. You'd be like, it's Friday at 11 p.m. My other teammates aren't working. And so that gets a little bit trickier because you're doing it at Friday at 4 p.m., right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we're very well trained on that at WP Buffs because we do we have literally a 24/7 team. So every single message we send, if we're tagging someone, we have to think about what time zone they're in. So we have different kind of collections of tagging. Some people like team 1 versus team 2, with people in different time zones. And so, that is really important. Agreed. I have a question about synchronous versus asynchronous work, just like your experience in the last week or so working from Hawaii. Did it change the order in which you are doing your work? Is it different than the order you would have done your work had you been at home? I guess meaning like, were you working on kind of stuff that was easier to work on by yourself first in the day and waiting till later in the day to work on more collaborative stuff? Or were you just kind of working on stuff as you would normally?
So yes, but that's flipped. I was working on all the collaborative stuff when I first started. And then as the day got later, I was working on all the independent stuff and the quiet stuff at night.
Time zones, even for a 24/7 team, time zones are hard. They will never stop being hard. But yes, correct.
But the thing is, that's how I usually work anyway. I like to sort of get all my human interaction in the morning, starting like 9, 10. And then around like 1 or 2, I kind of dig into the deeper work. So that worked out just fine. There wasn't much of a difference in my work pattern other than I was extra mindful of customer emails. Yeah. Because my teammates,
How so?
just looking through my inbox, looking at everything that's unread and seeing if there are any like support tickets that I need to look over, because part of what I do is monitor the support tickets to make sure that nothing needs me and just so that I know what's going on. So most of the time they don't require any action from me, but if they do, I want to make sure that that's looked at first. You know, a customer isn't really going to be like, oh, it's okay, she's in Hawaii, you know? And so that was a priority. But other than that, there wasn't much of a shift in my work habits, right? Other than, like in a regular day, I can kind of do a first in, first out with my customer emails because I'm working hours that they expect. Whereas in this instance, I wasn't. So I want to make sure that they get their stuff during the time that they expect. So that's sort of the time zone stuff and the hard stuff. But there was also like really awesome stuff. For example, this fascinated me. I started tweeting about it, which was, especially when I was really, really jet lagged, this went away as the time went on.
Tweeting while jet lagged.
Those are two separate ideas. I was tweeting about this effect, period. When I was very jet lagged.
Oh, okay, got it.
I was working like 4 to 1, 5 to 1. So when I was done at 1 or 2, I had the whole day for activities. And that was really cool. You know, because don't you kind of feel like sometimes you get into this pattern, especially when you're in your regular time zone of like, you sleep, you know, you do your work, and then it's the evening. So you've got time to like work out, eat dinner, futz around for a little bit, and then go to bed, right?
I'm a master putzer. That's my skill.
Me too. And when you finish work at 1 p.m., you're not going to putz until you go to bed, you know? You're going to eat lunch and then be like, all right, what are we doing next? Totally. And that was super fun. And I definitely had this thought of, wow, what would it be like to just work from this time zone and do that same body acclimation training to just make a go to bed at 7 p.m., wake up 8 hours later, you're normal, and have that be every day. Because then the other thing about Hawaii especially is that it's not like there's not much stuff going on at night, right? When you're here because it's so beautiful and the sunrises and the sunsets are beautiful. So once the sun went down, I was like, meh, you know, and that was really cool. I was really into that. And of course, as I got more used to the light cycle, again, sleep nerd, I know what I will naturally do with my sleep eventually, and I don't work to change it. But if I did, that could be a really interesting advantage in terms of life quality, honestly. If you're somebody who the thing that makes you happy the most in the entire world ever, period, is hiking and beautiful beaches, what a life it would be to teach yourself to go to bed at 7, wake up early, work an East Coast job, and then have your day every single day in the middle of the day to do all those beautiful Hawaii things, then go to bed and do it again. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool.
I think that is super cool. You're like giving me this like light bulb moment right now almost, because I think like the ability to, like, people think about that, like go to bed at 7, wake up at like 4 or whatever, go to bed at 7, wake up at 3 and work. Like, that's crazy. Like, how could you do that? Like that time thing is crazy. Obviously there are things that will stop people from doing that, like having a family, or like, you know, they're obviously like, there are blockers to this. But for someone who's at the life stage like you, this is for sure like a totally real thing you could go and do. And in terms of like getting to bed at 7 and waking up early, it seems like this, like, how could you ever do that? Like, that's crazy. But like, it's really just like a mental blocker. Like, people have this thing, it's like, that's so hard. It's like, no, it's not. You just do it. You figure it out. You go to bed early, you wake up, you know, at, earlier, and you're afternoon becomes your evening, and it's just a different lifestyle. But that's a totally possible thing. And so many people I feel like are looking for people in Hawaii. Like this is it's a really nice time zone to have someone there. I'm sure it's actually been very beneficial for you and Liquid Web in some ways to like have someone stationed there to be getting work done when nobody else is. So yeah, that's a really cool idea. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Especially the nighttime movement, things like that, just getting small things moved around. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I added that qualifier, right? It's all about priorities. Obviously, if you have a family, you're not going to bed at 7 p.m. every night and waking up at 4 a.m. every night. And honestly, the benefit, yeah, very well. Everybody goes to bed at 7 p.m., you know? And there's also like, you have to really value that span of time in the mid-afternoon, right? Like that would have to be like the thing. You are willing to do something that your body maybe naturally may not do because you want that. Because again, everybody has different sleep patterns, and our bodies, like biologically, work to make you sleepy when the light is gone. That's why you're not supposed to look at your phone and the blue light screen before you go to bed, because it tells you to stay awake, right? And so it may not be usual, but for the person who wants that really badly, it's possible here. And that is something that I found really interesting. I'm not that person. I really like my urban lifestyle, quote unquote. Hiking is fun every once in a while. I love the hikes that I did over the weekend. I love the beaches here. They're incredible. But I don't know that I would commit to a life of going to bed at 7 p.m. every day just for that. Yeah. Right? And so it really just depends. Whereas my friend's mom, she was clearly the kind of person that was willing to do anything to get Hawaii every single day. And then other things, I don't know, some non-time zone and non-work things that I noticed while I've been here. There's definitely something to be said for just the difference of being out of your time zone as a human. Like there's like a good 6-hour span in which I'm usually talking to my friends that I'm just alone with my thoughts, right? Because like once 5 p.m. hits, which is usually the time in which I text friends, make plans, whatever, you know, everybody's asleep on the East Coast because it's 11 p.m. So I'm just kind of like sitting there looking at my internal world, you know? And that's been really good and interesting, honestly, like reflecting and thinking. And it's almost like a meditative thing that has been really good for me and been very restorative. And then there's definitely the factor of the aloha. I don't know if this would be true for anybody looking to take their work on the road, but certainly in Hawaii, people are very, very friendly. They're very mindful of their neighbors and their communities. And so I definitely had an instance in which I walked out to like get something from the car or something. And one of the neighbors was like, "Oh, so you do leave the house. I've been watching that car be parked there all day. What are you even doing? You're in Hawaii. Why aren't you leaving?" And I was like, well, so like I'm keeping up with my job as I'm here.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been me.
Right on. Let's finish up with one last thing I did want to talk about, which was video call stuff. When I am at home, like right now, I have like really nice video camera and like this nice background. And like, you know, it's like I don't know, more respectable for me than when I'm traveling. Sometimes I'm traveling like, you know, with my laptop and I'm in like a dark area or something's not going exactly right. It's not as controlled as I have it here. Do you still do, I guess video calls to the team is going to be different. That's internal and I guess doesn't matter as much, but like, do you do any external calls with anybody? And is that ever affected by your travel?
So I'm very blessed that I didn't have to do any external calls during the time that I was here because that would have possibly been an issue because, again, since I've been getting into this pattern of getting to work as early as possible, I'm in my pajamas.
Maximum pajama.
Maximum pajama. Joe even pointed out before the call that I have my hair like this crazy top knot. I mean, and you know, like sometimes this is true at home too. Then, you know, you'll make sure that you look presentable if you have a call with a potential customer or things like that. But I didn't have to worry about that in these last week and a half. So that was nice. But then the other thing is just like the equipment aspect, right? I mean, obviously honestly, I love having my monitor and it makes my work easier to just have it bigger. But at the same time, like, I don't really mind working on my laptop. I actually really enjoy it. And I think that's just a factor of like, I'm an overall small person, right? Like proportions. I don't know, like for the listeners that have ever met me, like, you know, you or that have never met me, you don't know that I'm like 5 feet tall, right? Like I'm like small girl, big voice. So having my MacBook Pro with the screen is actually like, you know, it's a considerable percentage of my total body size. So I don't really mind it. I don't have to crouch or anything to work on a MacBook Pro. So for me, it's very comfortable, but obviously having my monitor there is nice, and not having that on the road makes a big difference. Honestly, if anything, I miss my webcam more. Again, I've talked about this on the show before, just sort of how I feel that video call presentation tends to be like the modern day WordPress worker suit, right? You don't dress up for work, but you need to make sure that your video looks good and presentable. And certainly my webcam at home does a better job with the video than the laptop webcam. But other than that, you know, it's been okay.
Cool. All right. Let's wrap up the episode for today. That was awesome. It's really cool to talk about this, not just in like theory, but like actually in practice. And you're doing this right now and doing this podcast recording from Hawaii and working from there. It's interesting to learn like how you've done things. And yeah, hopefully this will help other people, not just pure entrepreneurs or founders, but people who are the many, probably more than the founders, you know, in numbers, the employees of a lot of companies who also want to work remotely and want to have a, you know, fun remote life. This is important for everybody to know how to do this. So cool. Reviews. Where can people go to leave us a review?
Leave us a review about how much you love this podcast by going to wpmrr.com/iTunes.
Yes. Leave your favorite emoji. Leave your 5-star review. It helps us get found in the iTunes store. It helps us stay motivated to do more podcast recordings from Hawaii. Aloha. If you're a new listener, people should binge some episodes, shouldn't they? Shouldn't they go back in time and listen to some past episodes, Christy? I think that's a good idea.
Do what I did with that Switched on Pop podcast. Oh my gosh, have you heard that podcast? It's so good.
No, what's that one?
It's like a pop culture and media podcast. They do like reviews and musical breakdowns of popular music. But the point is, you can do with WPMRR what I did with that podcast, which is I clicked on the sorting feature that said newest first, and I switched it to oldest first. And then I hit the first episode and I press play.
All right.
Do that with WPMRR.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Go back and listen to that first episode where we were for sure getting warmed up on the on the microphones. Yeah. Oh man, that makes me want to go back and listen to some of our first episodes and see what our thought processes were back then. It'd be cool. It's like almost going back in a time machine. Cool. Questions. If people have questions for the show, the last Q&A episode we did, Christy, was super cool. That was fun.
I want to do another Q&A. That was a blast. So definitely send your questions over to yo@wpmrr.com. That's yo@wpmrr.com. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you're wondering about. And we'd love to answer some questions on the show.
Hell yeah. WPMRR.com. If you're an agency or a freelancer and you're having your roller coaster revenue months, some up, some down, feast or famine, why not focus a little bit more on monthly recurring revenue? Christy over at Liquid Web, they do obviously their hosting subscription. WP Buffs does a 24/7 care plan subscription. Bring some care plans into your life. You can learn how to do what we did at WP Buffs because we open sourced everything we do and distilled it into a nice video course for you. So go check it out. We're doing 75% off right now. So you can get it at WPMRR.com. Aloha, Christy. We will catch y'all next Tuesday.
Aloha.